I thought we would, so if we don't decriminalize drugs, it's over. This is one of their greatest foot in the door to bring in militarized police and tyranny, and they've done a great job. Now they're wheeling the drug war mechanism around the artillery to be brought to bear on the American people. Now everybody's a terrorist. Liberals, conservatives, gun owners, veterans. I mean, we've got more reports saying alternative media are terrorists today. Mainstream news we broke a few weeks ago, and now mainstream news on the Drudge Report and places. So I wanted to go to a very interesting researcher. We appreciate his time, Jeffrey Miron. He's written a book called Drug War Crimes, The Consequences of Prohibition. Says we could save $77 billion a year by decriminalizing drugs. Yeah, but the big banks launder $400 billion a year in drug money, so they don't want that to happen. They get to leverage that, too. And he is a professor at Harvard and Department of Economics at Harvard University, and a very long bio. You can just Google his name, Professor Jeffrey Miron. And we appreciate him coming on the show until the bottom of the hour. Then I'll have open phones and take your calls about YouTube suspending our channel, England and Canada openly announcing an end to free speech. You'll be arrested, basically, if you criticize global warming, and a lot more. Let's go ahead and go to the professor. Professor, thanks for coming on with us.
Thanks for having me on.
So tell us what you found on the economic side with the data of what the phony drug war does and what would happen if we did like some other nations have done and started backing off these draconian laws.
Well, I mean, the laws are a key source of a lot of the violence that we're observing, for example, in Mexico right now, because when you criminalize something, you drive it underground. When you drive it underground, people resolve their disputes with guns instead of using lawyers, advertising, and so on.
Boy, that's right. 6,500 people dead last year. They're online to kill 10,000 this year. They're in open collapse, and they're blaming not enough drug laws for what's happening.
Right. I mean, the laws just make things worse. For one of the examples we might see in the near future is all the violence in Mexico has given people an excuse to say, well, the problem is the guns. The guns are coming from the U.S., so therefore we need more gun laws. But if you have more gun laws, you tend to drive that market underground, and you just generate violence in the illegal gun industry as people resolve disputes there with violence rather than standard nonviolent mechanisms. So
exactly,
the more laws, the more likely you are to see the violent dispute resolution.
Okay, well, I mean, break down, because you're an economist and a prestigious one, break down the numbers of what we're dealing with here and just another case for decriminalizing.
Well, the numbers, I should emphasize, to me, are only one part of the story. But if the U.S. were to legalize drugs, we would probably save $40 to $45 billion per year by not hiring police and prosecutors and prisons and so on. We'd also raise something like $30 to $35 billion per year in tax revenue by imposing standard taxation similar to alcohol and tobacco on legalized drugs. Now, I say that's only one part of the story because I think what's at least as important are all the other effects of legalizing, which is allowing people to make their own decisions and choose to do what they want to do as long as they're not harming other people. That's exactly what we do with alcohol. We keep it legal, and we only punish activities involving alcohol that are harmful to innocent third parties, such as driving. And
Professor, I'm sure you've seen the statistics where prescription drugs are killing 300,000 a year, alcohol's killing a couple 100,000, cocaine and heroin and all these things, as bad as they are, kill a fraction of that, and usually that's because they're dirty and have been cut by bad things because they're not regulated.
Exactly. The quality control in an underground market is likely to be a lot worse than in a legal market. In an underground market, you're going to have accidental poisonings and accidental overdoses because people don't know what they're getting. In a legal market, some people do stupid things with alcohol, but it's rare that someone is confused about the fact that, the spirit like whiskey or scotch is serious. They know what they're getting, and they know if they want to have a mild dose, they drink beer or wine. So you don't get all these unintended effects that you do in underground markets, and people don't know if it's 10% cocaine or 90% cocaine.
Well, Professor, you wrote the book, Drug War Crimes, and, I mean, this always corrupts police. Look at Mexico. Look at the United States. I mean, I come across 4 or 5 articles a day and don't even cover them. I'm not even here to bash the cops. I mean, but I'm not, not covering it because I'm covering up. I'm just totally, it's passé where they're caught dealing drugs, selling drugs. Half the towns around Austin or more, the sheriffs and police chiefs have been caught, or their children dealing drugs with them. Cops caught stealing drugs out of drug lockers, taking protection money from criminals. And then cities all over the country stealing people's cars and homes with asset forfeiture seizure. To me, it's the corrupting of society with black markets that is the biggest thing. While we have got to decriminalize now.
Well, I certainly share your view. I would emphasize. Let me just say one small thing. I would use the word legalization, not decriminalization, because by decriminalization, some people mean that you're legalizing the possession, but not the production and sale. My analysis, to get the full benefits, to eliminate the black market, you have to legalize and allow all aspects of the market to be above ground. But that clarification, absolutely, the corruption is a horrible aspect of it, and the disrespectful law that's bred even more generally, because most people realize that the laws are being widely disobeyed, both by users and by producers, and so people get into this mindset of realizing that basically laws are for suckers. Only people who are stupid, bother to obey the laws that they don't like. Most people just get around them, and that's really destructive for a civil society.
Yeah, I saw a report. There's something like 54 million non-filers now, and it's growing by millions every year because it turns out half of Congress isn't paying taxes or behind, and most of the CEOs are paying like 1%. And then they admit they don't enforce on the rich guys; they enforce on the middle class and working people. So it's not just the drugs. I mean, Professor, are you not seeing just a more and more lawless two-tier system where governments are exempt? Well, I'm sure you've heard about California, where 1 million people now have government license plates that can't be pulled over or read.
I hadn't heard that fact, but that's very interesting.
Oh, I'm not kidding. In fact, I'll pull it up later because we're live at prisonplanet.tv. But, okay, well, I'm pontificating here. You've studied the history of this. I mean, going back to the 30s, everything was legal at the local drugstore, and we had much less drug use. What's the psychology then behind this bogus argument that if we legalize drugs, everybody will become drug addicts?
Well, we criminalized marijuana in 1937. We criminalized cocaine and opiates in 1914. It's hard to say for sure what drug use has done before and after because we don't have good data once it's been driven underground. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to suspect that if we legalized, that some additional people might choose to use, and if we legalized, the price would fall, in some cases by substantial amounts, and that would also be a reason why some people might use or use more. But the crucial thing to think about is it a negative if more people use? And my answer is not necessarily. What's negative is if people use in an irresponsible way, either toward others or toward themselves or toward their family members. But what we observe from virtually all commodities, all activities, is that a few people misuse them in stupid ways. Some people go bungee jumping in ways that are, super dangerous, but most people go bungee jumping don't want to die, and they make sure they have adequate safety restraints and things like that. And most people use alcohol in a way which is moderate and beneficial or pleasurable to them, and it's a relatively small fraction that misuse it. And my assessment of the evidence is we would see exactly the same thing for legalized marijuana or cocaine or heroin. There, of course, are many mild ways to consume the drugs which are conventionally thought of as being the hard drugs. You can drink coca-tea instead of snorting crack cocaine. You drink coca-tea, you get a bit of an up in the way you would from a super caffeinated cola or something like that, but you don't become some sort of homicidal killer or any of the bizarre things that people claim based on very little evidence.
Yeah, well, Reefer Madness shows, people murdering folks when they smoke pot, so we know that's ridiculous.
Right, everybody who's had any experience with marijuana realizes that that's ridiculous. And, of course, the current claim about marijuana is that it causes amotivational syndrome. It makes people lazy and lethargic. That's the exact opposite of what the government was claiming a few decades ago.
Absolutely. Well, in my experience in Austin with all these potheads, people that do use it a lot do become lackadaisical. But, again, that's being abused. It's great for people with stomach aches, and George Washington smoked it and grew it, so we know that he was not lazy or stupid. Professor, final segment coming up, but I've seen a lot of the studies and statistics in Europe where when they do decriminalize or legalize, drug use goes down because now it's not risque, it's not associated with being cutting edge, and we actually see when it's legalized, and I have seen some statistics from 80, 90 years ago where use was actually less because, Coca-Cola had cocaine in it. But there's that point I want to talk about when we come back. But there's also some of the other facets, the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the Ritalins, the speed drugs. You have tens of millions of Americans on these, and I've interviewed medical doctors. Their molecules are more toxic in many cases than the illegal drugs. So why do we have the government and the media with one hand pushing all of these legal drugs that are just as bad with their chemical makeup or worse, but then saying we got to give up all our rights and have SWAT teams raiding everybody for stuff that isn't even as bad? Let's talk about that when we get back. The good old folks at New Silver Solution. And the website is supernaturalsilver.com. Supernaturalsilver.com. This is something that kills bacteria, viruses, you name it, well documented. They've got it down to a super small nano-sized particle. Supernaturalsilver.com. Check them out at Infowars.com. Supernaturalsilver.com.